All right. Well, thank you, and thanks for the segue into regulation, Mike. I was getting a little worried there in the beginning because it looked like I didn't have a role in this at all. It's hard to sit and listen for 4 hours and then get up and talk about things that have already been discussed largely. Number one, you get a little nervous, which is why I'm staying right here and behind the pulpit instead of like all the professors that wander around out there. And two, it gives you a lot of ideas. And I've spent the whole day here, which is unusual for me because yesterday, for instance, I was in 9 meetings on as many topics. So to spend one day and hear it all about weed resistance, number one, I think demonstrates the agency's commitment to helping solve this problem. And number two, it hopefully shows that we don't have all the answers yet, as you'll see as I go through my presentation. So these are the things I'm going to talk about. They seem like a lot, but some of them are pictures, so we can breeze right through those. And, well, let me get into it. So our goal, as others' goals are, is to extend the useful life of chemicals, delay the development of resistance to all the pesticides that we regulate. But as we learned throughout the day, weed resistance is a complicated issue. It's actually a wicked problem, I learned today. And sitting in the back, I could look up wicked problem on my iPhone, because I thought it was just a bad problem. And I didn't realize it had a context to it, but Wikipedia actually defines it. So you learn a lot from sociologists, I guess. But, we've talked about all the competing interests, the multiple stakeholders, the economic issues, which I personally think should be driving this issue. The social issues, I think the behavioral issues, the reluctance to do something today that is going to cost you money, even though you could save money in the long run, and the fact that everybody, including us, are stakeholders and are part of this solution. So this just shows kind of how Palmer amaranth, everyone uses Palmer amaranth instead of pigweed, but and I guess that's what makes them weed scientists. But just kind of how it's gone out of control here. It also shows that glyphosate had a little peak and then seems to be tailing off. And then this talks about its percent of gross revenues, and it's pretty significant when it's such a steep curve over from 2007 until 12. So I know you've seen a lot of graphs today, and they're all heading upward, which isn't good. So we've had a number of different approaches to managing resistance. Some have proven semi-successful and some not so successful. Fungicides and insecticide registrants sometimes have specified the number of applications and require rotation to a different mode of action to manage resistance. PIPs, we actually required monitoring and reporting and stewardship plans, and there's thresholds for damage that trigger a remediation plan. Herbicides, not so much. No resistant requirements on labels, and we've seen multiple resistance problems as a result. Some companies have put in voluntary programs, but that's about it. So our goal is to have effective resistant management, but maintain flexibility for the growers, and I think we've heard that message loud and clear today. And it's not limited, I guess, to this issue. We always hear, whenever we come up with regulatory plans, that growers need the flexibility, whether we're talking about pollinators, which is big on the screen today, to endangered species, which do require local plans. So it makes sense that if you can achieve the goal, give the growers the flexibility to use the product. So we've gone over this a number of times today, but just to refresh everybody's memory, USDA makes the deregulation for genetically modified crops. And my talk today is kind of geared toward the genetically engineered, the herbicide-tolerant crops, because the use is expanding so much, and we think that it makes sense to start here. And then OPP licenses and uses the use of pesticides on these crops. We establish the terms and conditions with the registrants, which may include anything from stewardship programs or whatever. And we also approve the product labels that tells exactly how the pesticide can be used safely, where it won't result in adulterated food or whatever risk to applicators. I'm going to talk about resistant management frameworks and kind of what we're coming at it in terms of the pieces that we think would be result in a successful framework. One is that it involves all stakeholders. It seems like everything we do, that's number one, because we get in trouble when we leave people out. Allows flexibility to local conditions. Again, the flexibility component of it. Growers utilize BMPs, those developed by WSSA and the HRAC. And let me just say that this plan and kind of our approach to weed resistance is largely informed by WSSA and our partners at USDA, and I want to thank them for helping us think through this issue. They've been very helpful. Another aspect is that we have to promote early detection and containment, and that requires actually looking for it. And it involves open communication between all the parties. We need education and training. We need materials for consistent approach. We need communication about when resistance is occurring. And again, this would extend the useful life of the pesticide and preserve the technology. So what are the growers and consultants' role? Well, they've got to be proactive. Identification of likely resistance, and we talked about scouting, and there seems to be some resistance to scouting, but if you're not looking for it, you're not going to find it. Earlier in the day, the statistic for glyphosate monitoring went from 70 down to 40%, I think is telling in terms of how resistance was missed or how it developed and got a foothold in the first place. So we think scouting is an important part. Investigation and follow-up for likely resistance. And then remediation of the problem. And a good communication with the registrant or representative when the problems are found. And again, utilize the education and training materials that have been developed. So what are the registrants' roles? Again, proactivity you're going to see in everybody's role. They have to follow the terms and the conditions of the registration, and it's in their best interest to want to preserve the useful life of this. Labels must include a mode of action and generally agreed upon best practices. We've talked about putting mode of actions on labels. I think there's a lot of information now on the label, but the mode of action is important. It's been a voluntary program from us. We've talked about requiring it. We periodically look and see how much compliance we have. We make sure that new products have it on there, but it's something we can revisit. Making it mandatory is a big deal in terms of resources, and if largely the industry is compliant, then we don't want to have to go to OMB to get that authority. So, Establish and implement stewardship plans. I think this is an important piece because I think the registrant does own a big piece of this and has the clout to make sure that things are getting done by the growers. EPA doesn't want to bust a grower for not doing something on the label that might lead to resistance. We're not looking for that role, but I think it is in the registrant's best interest to do so. Communication to growers and stakeholders when problems are found. So the registrants are in the best position to keep everybody aware of what's going on, and if problems develop, to let us know immediately. Again, their development of educational materials, promote the use of BMPs, develop and implement a remediation plan when resistance or likely resistance is found, and to work to develop rapid diagnostic tests for resistance. This isn't something that we're going to require, but we think it's probably in the best interest of the registrants to do that, to either prove or disprove that this was a resistance issue. Here's a list of all the stakeholders. I'm not going to go through them, but as you see, it's a lengthy list. I think everybody has something to contribute, and you can see their key activities. We try to hook up with all these stakeholders to get their ideas, but certainly forums like this are good places for that to happen, and I want to thank the WSSA for inviting us here. So what's our role? Well, it's emerging. And as I said, we don't have a lot of the answers yet. We have things that we're working on to implement. One of the things that strikes me in this role versus my previous roles is I used to deal a lot with human health issues, which seem easy to tackle versus some of the things I'm dealing with now. Weed resistance is just this big blob of stuff that seems to morph into something else. At least with human health, I can put on gloves on somebody or put on a long sleeve shirt and we're done with it, or reduce the rates or reduce the amount on the food crop, or this is less clear. So we're reaching out and working with everyone. We're gaining an understanding of risk management that can be applied to all the pests, not just weeds. We need a common understanding of resistance and its causes, and I think we can draw on the expertise of some of the stakeholders to gain that better understanding. We'll require specific measures to address weed resistance on all new actions for herbicide-resistant crops. And we're going to utilize the registration review process to strengthen resistance management for pesticides such as glyphosate. So our proposed risk or resistance management elements, again, it's crucial to identify problems early before they become a really big issue, and we're relying on scouting to do that, and we're relying on reporting of when something is likely resistant to the register or their representative. And then in terms of registration, these would be things that we impose upon the registrant to do, develop a stewardship program, develop training and educational materials, investigate cases of non-performance, use NORS-worthy criteria for determining likely herbicide resistance. And it seems like I have never met Jason, but I feel like after today I know him. I've heard his name so much. I'm going to have to read the paper. So develop a remediation plan. If resistance is suspected, take the action to immediately control the resistant weeds. Thorough follow-up to assure that the problem is addressed. Annual reporting, not only through the 6A2 process do we want to learn of confirmed resistance, but we also need to know of likely resistance as it occurs. So, and then work to develop, again, the rapid diagnostic system, but again, we're not imposing this on the registrants, but I think, or at least at this time, but I think it's a good idea for them to consider. So, some of our next steps, we have a couple pending registration actions before us, and this isn't to imply that we're going to approve these, but they're pending. We put out a proposed decision on 2,4-D that included a resistance management plan, and people can see that. We're taking comments on it. We're talking to you and others about it. After the decision date on 2,4-D resistant corn and soybean, we have a dicamba resistant soybean and cotton action that we'd be considering later on this year. And then finally we have in registration review glyphosate coming up. So all things to look forward to on how we're going to handle these. So, and that's it. Thank you.